Appliancers are a multi-attributed machine strategy based around summoning Link 1 monsters with different effects based on the appliances they are. Vacculephant and Laundry can literally clean up boards. Kappa Scale ensures a fair trade from the graveyard, and Dryer Drake can use Gust of Hot Air to push back opponents or change the location of on-field monsters. The variety of these effects, as well as how easy it is to bring out the Link 1 appliancers, make this strategy conceptually similar to the likes of Sky Striker. A deck whose easy to summon and versatile Link 1 machines have allowed for it to see the heights of competitive play in multiple different formats since its release. Although Appliancers play on a whole different axis to Striker, and that's because of the ability of your main deck monsters to spam the field with a surprising amount of Link material, which easily allows you to summon out your archetypal Link 2 in Appliancer Celtopus, enabling the deck's main gimmick by letting your Link 1s co-link with this charging station, granting them access to their alternative effects, all while Celtopus literally powers up their attack points. This makes for a pretty intuitive and fun conceptual game plan, where you can alter how you use your appliancers to fit different situations by choosing whether or not you want them to be linked or co-linked, and with Celtopus's attack gain, you even have some out-of-nowhere lines for lethal. However, appliancers are generally seen as gimmicky and awkward to use, despite them having the theoretical blueprints for a successful archetype at their disposal. You see, a deck like Sky Striker is fully capable of taking advantage of its Link monsters, because not only is it backed up by an archetype's worth of excellent spell cards that can serve as disruption or board-breaking tools, but a lot of its links can generate you a ton of advantage over time, which enables the strategy to be able to play a grindy resource game and gradually whittle down an opponent's options while slowly opening up your own, or just go for lethal with OTK options after breaking a board. And the way the Appliancer tries to apply pressure with its archetype is a lot different. The strategy has some very capable link climbing tools that can be used to get you to a full setup with just a couple of cards, but none of the Appliancer links have effects that net you any kind of real card advantage or open up any explosive lines of play that could put you in a winning position. Instead, most of your link options either have battle phase oriented effects, ways to chew through your opponent's board, or both at the same time. And while these kinds of links make for some good supplemental options surrounding a stronger core, they just don't do enough to enable a realistic strategy by themselves, as they're incapable of actually interacting with an opponent's plays to potentially put a stop to their combo. As a result, Appliancer's biggest issues stem from it not having a real endboard piece within its own archetype, despite it being pretty capable of spamming material. Because even with the best hand you can think of, your ceiling is severely limited by how bad your best boss monsters are. Because of this issue, clever deck builders have tried their hardest to help the deck shine with a few different philosophies. If you wanted to play Appliancer as more of a combo deck, then it's worth looking into generically usable packages from other strategies. But the most common one that you'll be seeing is the Codebreaker monsters, a small engine of generically usable extenders that can allow for the deck like Appliancer to gain a bunch of free materials thanks to Celtopus having great arrows to pair with the Codebreaker Virus Berserker, which you can use to go into some strong Link 4s. On the other end of the spectrum though, certain pilots have tried to resolve this issue by leaning into a more control-centric gameplay, where instead of trying to combo off and summon out some generic boss monsters, you instead simply commit to a Laundry Dragon or Propellion and back it with a bunch of trap cards to slow the game down to a snail's pace and win over time by using your single Appliancer as both a way to clean up the field and a disincentive to prevent your opponent from attacking. And if neither of these appeal to you, and you want to play the archetype purely as it was intended, then you can go all into building a blind second and attempt to OTK with Dryer Drake and Propellion. Now, currently, none of these situations are going to result in Appliancers taking home their first YCS victory anytime soon, as each of these methods come with their own unique issues. But they do help to demonstrate that for as bad as Appliancers are right now, the deck has a lot of potential in how future support could enhance what it can do. But as it stands, it's both unfortunate and fascinating to see what pilots have been able to get out of their cards, while essentially being stuck in a cave with a box of scraps. So let's look into how the current Appliancer cards enable these kinds of interesting game plans, starting off with the shockingly fine main deck monsters. If Roboppi is the brains behind the deck, Socket Roll and Kobakel can be called the heart and soul, because most of the archetype's potentials come from these two Appliancers. Socket Roll specifically is your main enabler. It's an Appliancer name that can go into any of your Link monsters, which makes it an okay enough way to start off your turn as a normal summon, but it can also be used as an extender. As if you control another Appliancer monster, you get to special summon Socket Roll from your hand for free. And that includes if you control a second copy, which is great because it directly feeds into its on-field effect, Because if another socket roll is special summoned, you get to summon a third socket roll directly from your deck, resulting in Link 3's worth of materials with just 2 cards. But the really cool thing is that, ironically, it's not just socket roll that this effect works well with, as it pairs perfectly with the effects of Appliancer Copybockel. Copybockel's graveyard effect is something you'll see used in grindier games more than anything else, as it can't be used during the turn it was sent there. But it's solid enough as it allows you to banish it and target an Appliancer you control to special summon another Appliancer with the same name from your hand or graveyard, allowing you to trigger your socket roll really easily on turn 3. But the best part about Copybockel is actually its in-hand effect, as it allows you to target an Appliancer you control, special summon it from your hand, and at the same time, Copybockel will end up changing its name to that monster you target. So if you end up targeting a socket roll with the effect, Copybockel will end up changing its name to Socket Roll, which allows you to trigger Socket Roll's on-field effect, once again resulting in 3 links worth of materials. These 2 monsters lay down a pretty strong basis for what Appliancer is theoretically capable of, as this amount of material being so easily obtainable is absolutely nothing to sniff at, especially when you're not locked in any way, enabling you to summon out a bunch of decently strong generic boss monsters. But importantly for the archetype, Socket Roll and Copybockel give the deck a really easy way of getting Appliancer Celtopus in your extra monster zone, as well as a Link 1 of choice that you can have co-linked or not depending on the effect you want to use. Essentially, the deck has ways to make its plays. So if the cards surrounding these 2 end up making them easier to use, or allow them to go into a strong payoff, then that would end up putting Appliancer into a pretty decent position as a strategy. Now, a card like Appliancer Breaker Bunkle definitely doesn't help. It's the worst of your main deck monsters by a lot. Its effects don't really do much of anything. All it has is an in-hand effect to prevent you from taking battle damage, and an Appliancer monster from being destroyed by battle if you discard it during damage calculation, as well as a graveyard effect to protect an Appliancer you control from being destroyed by card effects by banishing it instead. And while these effects have their theoretical uses, especially with how battle phase oriented some of your links are, Breaker Bunkle is essentially just a much worse version of a card like Honest for the archetype, only capable of being used defensively to protect your link monsters with no real offensive capability, which can make it a pretty dead card in the deck, especially when compared to your other combo enablers. But a card like Appliancer Electrical Lyrical World manages to be a great option for the deck by making your bread and butter combo incredibly consistent, while also increasing the amount of link materials it can produce at the same time. Electrical Lyrical World has 3 effects. Its third is the least relevant, as all it does is let you move an Appliancer you control to a different main monster zone on a slot once per turn whenever an attack is declared. And while this can be helpful for accessing certain effects, managing your zones is already a pretty easy task in Appliancers, especially with the other options already available. The real meat and potatoes of Electrical Lyrical World is its first and second effect. On activation, it can add any Appliancer card that isn't a field spell from your deck to your hand, while its other effect lets you add an Appliancer monster from graveyard to your hand whenever you link summon an Appliancer. The first effect already makes Electrical Lyrical World an amazing card, as it opens up an entire archetype's worth of options. And while Appliancer isn't bursting at the seams with playables, it does have some pretty solid choices in both its back row and monsters for cards you could search. More specifically, it makes the Socket Roll to Copybockel combo way more consistent, as you can use Electrical Lyrical World to add whatever half you're missing. And if you're not missing either, you can just add any other card, whether that's one of your archetypal monster reborns for extra extension, or Appliancer Conversion if you're planning on a swift OTK. And while making your best line even more consistent, Electrical Lyrical World existing on the field further increases the strength of said combo, because after you use Electrical Lyrical World to search and have committed your socket rolls and Copybockles to field, then when you link summon Celtopus, you can use Electrical Lyrical to add back one of your socket rolls from graveyard so that you can use its in-hand effect to special summon itself on the field for free, which ends up resulting in Link 4's worth of materials. And Link 4's worth of materials can get you pretty far, whether you're using it for some kind of generic boss monster, or to just strengthen your actual Appliancer plays by giving you another link you can pair with Celtopus's end board. All of this to say that no matter which style of Appliancer you're going for, whether combo or control, the deck's issues don't lie in it not being able to get your play started. If anything, it's the opposite. The deck has a pretty consistent, albeit specific, combo that it can use to flood the field with a ton of material. And even if it's interrupted, it actually has some fine enough tools for extension, such as Appliancer Reuse, an archetypal monster reborn with no real restrictions, or even a once per turn. And the only downside on it being that whatever you summon will end up being returned to the bottom of your deck whenever it leaves the field, which honestly isn't even a downside. It's actually a benefit of the card, as it lets you put something like Socket Roll back to be summoned from the deck on a later turn to give the deck a better grind game. But either way, reuse is one of the most reliable archetypal monster reborns in the game. With this strategy being so focused on making Link 1s, you're virtually guaranteed to always be able to have fodder in grave for it to bring out. And drawing multiple just means you have the potential to spam even more bodies on field to either extend your plays, or even to start your combo in certain gummy hands. And that's not even the only great graveyard recursion the deck has. In fact, Appliancer Test has the potential to get you even more, as if you target one of your Appliance Link monsters with it, you get to summon out as many Appliancer Links from your graveyard to a zone that monster points to, but you have to banish those monsters during the end phase. Now, currently, because the highest Link rating of Appliancers is 2, you'll only ever get a chance to summon up to 2 Link monsters from your graveyard, and in general, Test is considered very win more, as it relies on you having both Celtopus on field with free Link zones as well as Link monsters in the grave to summon. But bringing out 2 monsters at the same time is still a pretty solid effect, and with Electrical Lyrical Whirl being able to search it, Test definitely has its uses as a decisive power play to turn the duel back around in your favor after your board has been broken. And this is the really interesting thing about Appliancer's failure in the actual game. When you look at the main problem, it's like the strategy was given everything it should have needed, especially when considering the context of when it was released, where there were just some insane generic boss monsters legal. But like we touched upon earlier, the deck's current potential is stunted by its terrible payoffs that make you wonder why you would ever play Appliancers at all. Appliancer Celtopus, for example, should theoretically be an incredibly strong tool for the deck. It's the only Appliancer Link monster with downward facing arrows, so it should incentivize you to have it in your extra monster zone in some way. But in actuality, its effects put it in a really weird position for the archetype. You need 2 Appliancer monsters to make it. And while it's linked in any way, it can't be targeted by attacks or your opponent's card effects, and it'll get different effects depending on how you arrange your Appliancer monsters under its arrows. If an Appliancer Link monster you control that isn't co-linked to Celtopus is destroyed, you get to draw a card for free. While if your Appliancer Link you control battles an opponent's monster while it's co-linked to Celtopus, you get to increase the attack of your monster by the number of monsters co-linked to Celtopus times 1000 for that battle, netting you up to a 2000 attack point increase. This co-link effect in particular has some decent power behind it, and even allows for Appliancers to OTK in the right circumstances. But for the most part, Celtopus's effects just don't do enough to keep it on the board. If you're playing a more control version of the deck, you rarely actually ever have a reason to bring out Celtopus, as this version of the deck usually just sits behind your Appliancer Link 1s to play low to the ground with its trap cards. But even in a combo variant of Appliancer, the only real reason you're summoning out Celtopus is because it's an Appliancer Link monster with some good arrows that doesn't have any kind of restriction on what you can use them for. This allows you to trigger the effective Electrical Lyrical Whirl for extension when you summon it, while still letting you to use it as link material for something else, unlike your Appliancer Link 1s. So it's a fine enough tool to bridge into other boss monsters, especially because its arrows are great, not just for your Appliancer monsters, but for the Codebreaker monsters, a commonly used engine in Appliancers that's great for the decks, as the arrows on Virus Swordsman and Berserker make it easy to co-link with Celtopus and gain access to their effects, which can help you generate a ton of free link materials all at once. But while this is a solid use of Celtopus, it's never remaining on field for long because it's just not worth it to keep it around, at least on turn 1, as it's essentially doing nothing but pointing in the right direction for your other links. And for it to be useful, those other links would need beneficial co-linked effects that make it worth jumping through the hoops to get Celtopus set up, and Appliancers currently just don't have that. And that's something that can be felt in almost every variant, as for a while, committing to an Appliancer Laundry Dragon was the best thing Appliancer could end on with its own archetype, as it gave you some kind of obstacle of your opponent's turn, even if it's not the strongest roadblock in the world. Like all the other Appliancer Link 1s, in order to summon Laundry, you just need to use an Appliancer monster, but it can't be used as link materials the turn it's summoned. Neither player takes any damage from battles involving Laundry, and if it's ever co-linked, then after damage calculation in a battle involving it, you get to banish your opponent's monster, while if it isn't co-linked, then after damage calculation, you get to destroy that monster it battled and inflict damage to your opponent equal to that monster's attack. Now, these effects don't exactly make Laundry Dragon sound like the most appealing endboard piece. Every one of those effects is entirely oriented around utilizing the battle phase as a way to remove your opponent's monsters from the field, and it doesn't really do much of anything at all to actually impede an opponent's plays. All you can really do with Laundry is watch as your opponent combos off into the best boss monster they can make, while hoping that Laundry's removal is enough to disincentivize your opponent from trying to attack you so that you can make it to turn 3. And whether your opponent crashes into Laundry or you do it yourself, there's a good chance Laundry will end up being destroyed by battle. If you want to activate its effect, given its pitiful 1500 attack, almost guaranteeing that you're going to lose some kind of resource unless you happen to have Breaker Bunkle in hand. But for Appliancer, because this strategy doesn't have any reliable turn 1 link monsters, Laundry Dragon Pass was the best thing they could do for a while. You see, for Laundry Dragon to be somewhat of a threat, all you really need to do is exist on field without it really mattering whether it's co-linked or not, which makes it a pretty decent low investment tool, as even in instances where you can't combo, having access to an Appliancer name gets you to Laundry Dragon for virtually zero work. And because of its removal, you might lose Laundry Dragon in the process, but you'll always be trading it profitably when it deals with an opponent's monster that they might have invested a few too many resources in trying to summon. So even though it's not the best endboard piece in the world, it's reliable enough. And if you can back it up with a couple of strong trap cards to serve as actual interaction, then suddenly an on-field Laundry Dragon can appear much more like a terrifying boss monster when your opponent is struggling to access their outs to it, and are either forced to beat over it and cut their losses, or let you use your own battle phase to remove their monster. Either way, Laundry's effect is triggering. Now, given how much we've praised Laundry Dragon for being a good low investment tool, you would think that trying to co-link into Celtopus doesn't sound worth it most of the time, and you would be correct. The best part about Laundry Dragon is how little you have to do to bring it out to the field, and its co-linked removal, while solid, isn't that much of an upgrade compared to its non-co-linked effect. But a co-linked Laundry still has some uses. Banishing monsters instead of destroying them can allow you to dodge certain protections that it not being co-linked would otherwise struggle with. And pairing it with Celtopus lets it reach a massive 3500 attack that it can use to beat over big beat sticks and still remain on field as a hard to deal with threat. Although with the most recent pieces of Appliancer support, Laundry Dragon's role has become a little bit redundant with the release of Appliancer Propellion, a card that can essentially do what Laundry Dragon does and even more. Propellion comes with the same summon conditions and restrictions as your other Appliancer monsters, but its native bonus effect allows it to always be able to attack directly. And like with Laundry, Propellion's co-link and non-co-link effects are really similar, as both allow you to reduce the attack of an opponent's monster to 0 during damage calculation. The only difference is that when Propellion's co-linked, you can activate it whenever any of your monster battles an opponent's monster, while when it's not co-linked, you can only activate it whenever Propellion specifically battles. These effects without a doubt make it the best link monster the strategy has available. It still has a few of the downsides that Laundry Dragon would, namely needing a battle phase for it to be a genuine threat is definitely unfortunate, but these effects are virtually just complete upgrades compared to Laundry Dragon when you see it as a removal tool, because instead of being vulnerable to being destroyed by battle, when you use Propellion's effects, you're virtually guaranteed to keep it around, no matter how high the attack of your opponent's monster is, while even getting some decent damage in to boot. And even though its interaction is just as limited as Laundry Dragon's, it's slightly better at doing what it does at disincentivizing an opponent's attack. And also, unlike Laundry, you have some genuinely strong reasons to summon out a Celtopus alongside a Propellion, because while its effect is virtually the same, having Celtopus to boost its attack is a core part of shooting for the Appliancer OTK, as it can net you an impressive 3,200 points of damage with just a single attack. But for this OTK to work, you need a couple more pieces, namely Appliancer Dryer Drake alongside an Appliancer Conversion, which can allow for Propellion to just go from a removal option to being able to end the game outright. You see, Dryer Drake's co-linked effect lets you swap the position of itself and another Appliancer monster in your main monster zone, in order to allow for other monsters to make a second attack during the battle phase. Meanwhile, Appliancer Conversion lets you banish Appliancer Link monsters from your field to summon out the same number of banished Appliancer Link monsters, letting you bring back the same monsters you banish and effectively treating them as new cards. So, assuming your opponent has 2 attack position monsters, it can commit Celtopus, Dryer Drake, and Propellion to the board with your usual combos. You can attack with Propellion, use its effect to reduce the attack of an opponent's monster to 0, while Celtopus increases Propellion's attack to 3,200. Then you can use Dryer Drake's effect to swap the position of itself and Propellion, allowing Propellion to attack one more time, which you can do directly thanks to its first effect, netting you another 1,200 points of damage for 4,400 points of damage total. This is quite a bit shy of lethal. But if you have Appliancer Conversion, you can banish Dryer Drake and Propellion from your field and return them so that they're co-linked to Celtopus again. And because they're technically new cards, you have the opportunity to attack again and use their soft once per turn effects, allowing you to repeat this combo for 8,800 points of damage without Dryer Drake needing to attack at all. And for a strategy that we've dunked on for having no real payoffs, this is a pretty legitimate line to lethal, and one that, when it works extremely well, as it blends pretty seamlessly with the strategy is always trying to do. But astute listeners will likely figure out a couple of key issues with this OTK, that make it just a little bit rough around the edges. Namely, being that it relies on your opponent having 2 attack position monsters for you to crash into. Now, given how prevalent big end boards are in the modern era, that part usually isn't too much of a huge issue. But if your opponent is ending on multiple monsters, those monsters will likely be ways to put a stop to your combo lines. So, for your push to lethal to be successful, you also need to pair it with the right board breakers or hand traps to ensure that your opponent's field can't stop you, essentially turning this 3-card combo for lethal into a 4 or 5 card combo instead, rendering it somewhat unreliable. And things get even worse because outside of this OTK, both Dryer Drake and Conversion lack any other kind of utility. Conversion, being able to dodge target removal or negation, is cute enough, and its graveyard effect, giving it some recursion, is fine, but it's definitely not impeding on an opponent unless it's dealing lethal damage. And with Dryer Drake having its co-linked during your opponent's turn, essentially doing nothing other than giving it 1000 attack because it happens to be linked, and having it not be co-linked is even worse, as all it can do is negate a single attack, which is terrible in combo builds because it's not really an interaction, so you'd rather spend your bodies and resources making something else, and is terrible in control builds because a Propellion or Laundry Drake already does its job, but better. Likewise, Vacculephant is yet another card that's pretty solid when going second, but just does nothing when going first. Its unique effect is just solid removal, allowing you to send a card from your hand to the graveyard to pop a card your opponent controls. If it's ever co-linked, you get to destroy a monster your opponent controls, while if it's not co-linked, you get to attack directly. However, you can only ever use one Vacculephant effect per turn, so if you use its unique effect as removal, you can't use its co-link effect to pop a monster and vice versa. This is unfortunate, because being able to remove 2 cards from the field with a Vacculephant would definitely be a solid perk of the card. But it is nice, at the very least, that this strategy has its own in-archetype removal that doesn't rely on the battle phase for once, letting you pop monsters and back row alike, making it a decently versatile tool that, because of its low commitment, is great when going second to chew through a board. But it's still not a payoff that makes the deck worth running at all. And given how common generic removal is in the modern era, it doesn't really make the deck any more appealing. In fact, the only Appliancer link with any kind of real turn 1 application is Appliancer Kappa Scale. You see, every Appliancer link 1 monster, including Kappa Scale itself, shares the same restriction that prevents it from being used as a link material to turn its link summoned, which can end up gumming up certain lines that might have you need to link away an Appliancer link monster while you're working with limited materials, as you'll be stuck with a monster with an upward pointing arrow in your extra monster zone, essentially floodgating you from link summoning while it's there. But if you choose to summon Kappa Scale specifically, you can use its non-co-link effect to special summon out an Appliancer with a level from the grave by tributing itself, which might seem like a pretty pointless exchange at first, but it sets up your graveyard pretty nicely for the likes of Appliancer Reuse to return Kappa Scale to the field, which now can be used as a link material as it becomes a new card that wasn't a link summon this turn, freeing up an extra path to get to a Celtopus or any other kind of link too. Kappa Scale's co-link effect is a little bit less useful, as all it does is allow you to target an Appliancer link monster in your graveyard and special summon it by tributing Kappa Scale. But it's always nice to have an extra recovery option, especially one that can free up your Celtopus zones for any other monster, letting you commit to more than just 3 Appliancer links at any given time. But for all the merit that these link monsters have, none of them make any kind of feasible interaction when you're trying to go first. So while it can spit out a ton of free link materials, it begs the question of why you would want to play Appliancers specifically. This isn't just a question asking why you wouldn't play a better deck, but one that wonders what Appliancers bring to the table. There are a ton of other decks out there that are also capable of getting a ton of free link materials on board, from the likes of Goki to the more specialized Mathmech or Cypress piles. And even the worst of these strategies have some kind of unique appeal to make their brand of combo a little bit more interesting. Whether that's unlocking a powerful archetype specific boss monster, gaining access to some busted enablers, or even just getting to search a trap card to add to your end board. Appliancer doesn't have any of that, and that, more than anything, is its worst crime. It's not just a mediocre deck, it's one that's mediocre in a boring way, and just being a link spam deck with nothing fun or interesting to show for it. The deck holds promise in having links that can theoretically apply for many different situations, depending on where you summon them to, which sounds like a really cool feature. But these options don't have any kind of concrete game plan for them to orbit around, making your utility belt of options ultimately pointless, which you can't prepare for anything to put a stop to your opponent, something that's going to come up in almost every game of Yu-Gi-Oh! Now, it can definitely be argued that Appliancer shouldn't need to be pigeonholed into having any kind of turn 1 play, and that it should be allowed to be the going second deck that its Link monsters want it to be, but even then, your best going second play, the OTK, is extremely specific, finicky, and if it fails to win on the first turn, you have essentially nothing to fight back with as your opponent rebuilds. Compare this to a deck like Tenpai, another strategy that more than anything wants to be able to OTK immediately, and while it might struggle a little bit if it can't reach lethal, it has some competent enough tools to make your opponent's turn somewhat of a struggle, whether that's bringing out Hieratic Seals or committing the materials necessary to be able to summon Black Rose Dragon during your opponent's battle phase. In comparison, the tools that Appliancer has available to it to recover from an unsuccessful OTK are just a lot more limited, and that's a genuine shame. Because there's definitely something to this strategy with its ability to combo. It's not completely dead in the water compared to a lot of other failed archetypes due to having some pretty insane main deck cards. It's just missing a payoff, something to consolidate the deck around and reward you for playing Appliancer monsters. Whether that's some kind of new boss monster or a trap card to serve as interaction, which could genuinely make the deck as versatile as it was in the anime. But as it stands right now, the planned obsolescence of these particular appliances is in full effect. For 3 days only, we have a Christmas TCG mystery bag. Each bag has an exclusive Christmas hat spider keychain, but also they come with a pack of card sleeves, a deck box, a field center, and a grab bag of staple Yu-Gi-Oh cards, plus a pack of Power the Guardians. In addition, it has 3 random items from the merch store. The bags will go on sale Christmas Eve and only be buyable through the 26th.